Imagine drifting over still waters under a silver sky, where the air hangs heavy with silence not born of peace, but of something withheld. Below, the sea does not stir in rhythm with the wind. Instead, it hums, a pulse that feels more like thought than motion. Instruments fail, birds vanish from the sky, and machines begin to whisper sequences no human taught them. Then one night, without warning, an entire crew disappears, leaving behind only food on plates and spirals carved into steel. A presence beneath the surface begins to speak, not in words, but in patterns etched into the minds of those who dare to listen. Whatever it is not new. It has waited. Don't forget to like and share this story with your friends or closest family members to help spread awareness and caution through storytelling. May you receive great rewards for subscribe, like, comment, and share this story. Now, let's continue with the story. The R/V Solstice cut through the still waters of Pamlico Sound with quiet efficiency. The March air was chilled but clear, a pale fog barely clinging to the reeds along the far horizon. Aboard were 6 crew members, marine biologists, data technicians, and climate physicists, handpicked for a special expedition by the Carolina Coastal Institute. Their mission was deceptively simple: map recent anomalies in the electromagnetic profile beneath the seafloor. Satellite scans had detected rhythmic spikes near an ancient underwater ridge, pulses that repeated in a Fibonacci-like pattern. At first dismissed as equipment malfunctions, they were later confirmed through multiple agencies. Something was moving in perfect mathematical harmony, beneath a seabed believed to be geologically inert. Dr. Celeste Rainier, a young physicist with a growing reputation for pattern recognition in oceanic anomalies, stood on the deck near dawn. She wasn't sleeping much anymore. Not since they crossed into the anomaly zone. Her ears buzzed at times, not painful, just constant. Like a whisper that never quite became words. Third spike in under 6 hours, called Langston, the systems tech, from inside the cabin. Amplitudes increasing. Still no variation in frequency. This thing's locked like a metronome. Rainier entered the main console room and stared at the monitor. On the screen, waveforms spiraled inward like some kind of living signature. Beside them were readings from the acoustic sensors. The decibel output was climbing, still below human detection threshold, but rising steadily. "Any natural source?" she asked. Langston shook his head. "No tectonics. No marine life. It's too clean." That night, around 2:30 a.m., the crew was awoken by a sharp change in cabin pressure. Lights flickered. The vessel's autopilot systems reset themselves, logging coordinates that did not exist on any map. Langston ran to the navigation console. The system just punched in something called .0. No file match. No backup log. Rainier stared at the walls, heart pounding. Someone, or something, was inside the system. Not erasing. Guiding. Then, it began. A low-frequency hum vibrated through the hull. Not loud, but felt like a tuning fork against bone. On the inner walls, spiral shapes began appearing. Not drawn, not etched, but formed by subtle discolorations in the metal, emerging as though always there, waiting for activation. By the time the crew tried to send a message, it was too late. Langston managed to hit send on a single fragment. "The pulse is changing. Geometry moving inward." That was the last transmission. 6 days later, when the Solstice was found drifting, it was silent. The engines had powered down. The food was still warm. The ship's internal log had been wiped, except for one last image, the spirals. Rendered perfectly, over and over again. A signal of impossible precision. But there was no one left to hear it. The crew of the Solstice had vanished, leaving nothing behind but silence, static, and a mystery deep enough to swallow time itself. The debrief room at the Naval Oceanography Command in Norfolk, Virginia, was quiet, cold, and sterile. On the screen at the far end of the room, satellite footage showed the Solstice, intact, adrift, and utterly lifeless. Rear Admiral Joanna Bell, tasked with coordinating the federal response, watched the loop for the 50th time. Still no signs of forced entry. No signs of a struggle. No environmental threats in the vicinity. But what disturbed her most wasn't the empty decks. It was the absence of panic. Dr. Elias Voss, a civilian signal expert brought in from DARPA, clicked through still images of the interior walls. The spirals had changed. Unlike any natural corrosion or chemical reaction, they weren't burned or scratched into the alloy. Instead, the steel itself had somehow realigned its surface structure, impossibly smooth to the touch, as if written from within the molecular lattice. "They're not just symbols," Voss said softly. "They're instructions. Sequences. A form of recursive information coding. I don't think the crew made them." Admiral Bell narrowed her eyes. "Then what did?" Voss didn't answer. Down in the labs, technicians were still trying to trace the final transmission, the partial message that read, "The pulse is changing. Geometry moving inward." They triangulated its source to a seafloor shelf 1.3 nautical miles southwest of Roanoke Island. The coordinates didn't match any known geological feature. When divers were dispatched to survey the location, they found something stranger than wreckage, a perfectly symmetrical depression in the sediment, nearly 60 meters in diameter. Sonar revealed nothing inside. No debris, no currents, just a circular silence. The surrounding water exhibited an unexplainable drop in temperature, exactly 3.14 degrees Celsius lower than the average for that zone. The diver leading the operation, Lieutenant Maribel Singh, surfaced early with a strange account. She had heard a sound, faint but steady, transmitted through her suit's audio system. It didn't match any marine frequency. When recorded and played back at high speed, the signal resembled human speech, but twisted. Translators and linguists could extract only one word with confidence: begin. News of the Solstice discovery barely made local press. The Coast Guard issued a statement calling it an unresolved navigational failure under investigation. But whispers were spreading through the eastern seaboard's scientific communities. Researchers who had monitored magnetic anomalies for years now feared they were looking at something sentient. Not far from the coast, in a cluttered home office in Manteo, amateur historian and ex-oceanographer Thomas Cale examined a map pinned to his wall. Red circles marked every disappearance across 4 centuries in the Pamlico region, from Roanoke to merchant vessels in the 1800s to the Solstice in 2025. All vanished within a pattern, one forming a shape he'd tried to deny for years. A spiral. Worse still, the dates of these vanishings aligned in ways too precise to ignore. Each incident occurred exactly 13,900 days apart. The next interval was less than a year away. That night, Cale wrote a message and addressed it to a university contact who had once been part of Project Sentience mapping. He didn't know if she would answer, but he ended the note with one question: what happens when the spiral closes? In a heavily secured subbasement beneath the University of North Carolina's Chapel Hill campus, Dr. Ada Reyes reopened files that had not been accessed in over a decade. She had once led a classified division under NOAA known only to a few as Project Sentience Mapping, a bold, controversial initiative that sought to catalog emergent non-human intelligences through anomalous environmental data. It was shut down in 2013 after its findings veered into unacceptable territory. Data points had begun clustering in ways that mimicked neural pathways, weather systems forming memory loops, acoustic bursts repeating like mantras. The ocean, it seemed, was listening. And now, the patterns were back. The Solstice case was identical to what she had feared most, an autonomous, non-linear signal behaving like a conscious feedback loop. Cale's letter lay open on her desk. His timeline was correct. His data was meticulous. And the number 13,900, nearly 38 years, was found repeatedly in deep-sea thermocline fluctuations going back to the 1600s. Ada zoomed into the sonar image of the circular depression. The spiral wasn't just a symbol. It was a key. She tapped into the open-access buoy logs from the past 30 days in Pamlico Sound and filtered by frequency. At exactly 3:13 a.m. for 21 consecutive nights, a tone had pulsed across 3 different underwater stations. When she overlaid the waveform with a golden spiral, the the curve matched perfectly. Then, something terrifying happened. Her screen went dark. A system override. Text blinked onto the terminal. Not from her machine. "You see it now." The words vanished as quickly as they had appeared. She stared, frozen, unsure if it was a hack or something else. A low hum filled the air, not from the computer, but from the very walls. Her water glass began to tremble. The frequency had found her. Meanwhile, back near Roanoke Island, a second research vessel, the Albatross, was preparing to launch a private expedition. Funded anonymously and crewed by former naval technicians, it was equipped with classified prototype resonance scanners capable of mapping cognitive harmonics, brainwave-level structures within environmental patterns. Thomas Cale stood at the dock as the crew loaded supplies. He held a photo of the Solstice crew, smiling, unsuspecting, and a hand-drawn spiral diagram on parchment, annotated with Latin words. Recipere, tanhair, transire, receive, touch, cross. The captain of the Albatross, Commander Wren Hadley, approached him. "We're not bringing this vessel home," she said. "You understand that, right?" Cale nodded. "If we cross into it, we either understand what's on the other side, or we disappear like the others." Hadley handed him a small sealed envelope. "This gets opened only if the signal stops. Not before." As the vessel slipped into the gray-blue waters, seagulls scattered in silence. No wind. No tide. Only stillness. Far below, the pulse resumed, low, constant, and deeper than time. And something, once again, began to listen. The Albatross moved across Pamlico Sound like a shadow gliding over a mirror. Its engines made no wake. Its instruments operated in absolute silence, as if the water itself had absorbed their vibration. Inside the cabin, dim red lights cast long shadows on the walls, where spiral diagrams and anomaly charts hung like offerings to an unknown god. Commander Wren Hadley sat in the control chair, studying the real-time resonance scanner. Across its sleek surface, a pulsing waveform bloomed inwards, slow, deliberate, patient. It was identical to the one recorded by the Solstice before the crew vanished. She reached for the comm, "Cale. It's here." Thomas Cale stood at the rear sonar station, jaw clenched. He had seen it before, in dreams, in echo patterns, in a 400-year-old carving passed down through his grandfather's journals. Now it was real. It vibrated through the floor. A resonance not heard, but felt, like déjà vu wrapped in pressure. "Deploy the cognition net," Hadley ordered. The device, a hybrid mesh of acoustic lenses and magnetofluidic nodes, was lowered into the depths. It was designed to capture not sound, not energy, but intent. If the ocean had a consciousness, this net would reveal its patterns of focus. At first, the readings were chaotic. Nothing but noise. Then, slowly, a structure emerged, waves of data bending into a shape that resembled a human cortex, mapped with non-terrestrial symmetry. A synthetic neural field forming beneath them. Cale's breath caught. "It's mimicking us," he whispered. "But it's not learning, it's remembering." Hadley turned to him. "You think it's been here before?" Cale pointed to a set of recurring glyphs on the net's sensor feedback. These symbols match carvings found in an abandoned Croton settlement. Same spiral design. Same central eye. But the carving was carbon dated to the late 1500s. Hadley frowned. "That's not possible." Cale continued. "Unless the Solstice wasn't the first contact. Unless what we're looking at isn't just alive, but eternal." Suddenly, the cabin lights dimmed. A tremor rolled through the ship, not physical, but mental. Crew members stumbled, covering their ears as if struck by invisible pressure. The cognition net had activated something. A voice, mechanical, vast, and emotionless, played through the ship's speakers. No translation needed. It was already in their minds. "Remember. Choose. Return." Cale's nose began to bleed. He dropped to his knees, overwhelmed by flashing memories not his own. Ships burning in fog, people walking into the ocean without struggle, spirals drawn in the sand by unseen hands. Hadley shouted, "Pull the net back, now." But the winch jammed. The net had rooted itself into the seabed, as if anchoring to something far older and stronger than steel. Outside the ship, the water began to glow faintly, a pulse matching the scanner's rhythm. A circular halo spread across the surface, concentric rings rolling outward like a signal beacon, summoning or unlocking. Then, without warning, the Albatross's primary systems shut down. Darkness consumed the cabin. Only the resonance pulse remained, vibrating through every nerve in their bodies. Cale, dazed but conscious, looked toward the ceiling as he whispered, "We've passed the threshold." And somewhere, just beneath the surface, something opened its eyes. The Albatross floated adrift under a moonless sky, powerless but eerily stable, as if cradled by unseen hands. Inside, emergency lanterns cast faint amber glows against the metal walls, while the crew tried to stabilize their nerves. The silence was not natural. It felt sculpted, measured. Commander Hadley reviewed the backup logs on a portable drive. There were no seismic events, no hull breaches, no environmental hazards. Yet each crew member reported the same sensation: pressure behind the eyes, fragments of memories that didn't belong to them, and a voice echoing the same three words: remember, choose, return. Below them, nearly 80 meters down, the cognition net remained lodged in a trench that hadn't existed on any prior seafloor maps. High-resolution bathymetric scans from the Solstice days earlier showed a smooth seabed. Now, the Albatross hovered above a jagged chasm at least 500 meters wide, shaped like a coiled shell. They had found the memory trench. Or perhaps, it had revealed itself to them. "Something wants us to see," Cale muttered, pacing the observation bay. "Not by accident. It's communicating, but through resonance, not language. A kind of inherited cognition." Dr. Rena Tadeo, the vessel's neurolinguistic analyst, nodded. Her eyes were sunken, her voice trembling. "It's not speaking to us as individuals. It's addressing species memory. Whatever this is, it has access to how we remember fear, wonder, and loss. I think it's using those as coordinates." Cale turned to Hadley. "We have to go down there." She studied him. "Without power? In a dive suit? That trench goes beyond mapped zones. If it collapses..." "It won't," he said, his voice steady. "It doesn't want us to die. Not yet. It wants us to understand." After a tense vote, it was agreed. Cale and Tadeo would descend using the emergency submersible, the Echo Pod. It was a two-person vessel designed for silent descent, armed with light pulse transmitters, and laced with passive neuroharmonic receivers, originally intended for deep-sea psychological experiments. They launched just before dawn. As they sank through the blackness, visibility dropped to zero within moments. The only guide was the slow pulse from the cognition net above, now relaying data back into the sub's internal HUD. At 120 meters, the static cleared, revealing something extraordinary. Structures. Below them, embedded in the walls of the trench, were massive spiral-shaped formations. Not rock, not coral, but layered material that shimmered in unnatural hues: copper, bone white, obsidian. They looked like fossilized machinery, half organic, half synthetic. Tadeo's monitors began registering signals again. Not sound, but thought forms. "Cale," she whispered. "They're alive. Not in the way we understand, but aware." Then, a shape moved past the viewport. Slow, elegant. Not fish, not man. It had no form, just a ripple of spiraled distortion in the water, as though reality itself had bent to let it pass. Both monitors flatlined. Then, the voice returned, louder now. Not mechanical, not alien, but familiar. "You have been here before." Cale stared through the glass, mouth open. In the distance, he saw 6 figures, humanoid silhouettes drifting motionless above a glowing spiral gate on the trench floor. It was the Solstice crew. Their eyes were open, and they were waiting. The 6 figures hovered just beyond the trench floor, their bodies suspended in a slow, dreamlike drift, untouched by current or time. Floodlights from the echo pod cast an eerie halo over them, illuminating pale faces and open, unblinking eyes. They were unmistakably the Solstice crew, unchanged, as if preserved in a moment just before awakening. Dr. Rena Tadeo pressed trembling fingers to the glass. "They're alive," she said, voice brittle with disbelief. "Not biologically, not neurologically, but they're still here. Resonating." Kale leaned forward. "Look at their hands." Each of the 6 was holding something. Smooth, translucent discs about the size of a human palm. They glowed softly with internal motion, spirals swirling just beneath the surface. They looked like instruments or keys. Suddenly, the HUD inside the pod lit up. Not with alerts, but with symbols. Mathematical, ancient, recursive. One pattern pulsed brighter than the others. A spiral nested within a spiral, blooming outward. The voice returned, no longer alien. It sounded now like Kale's own voice, as though memory had turned inward and become the messenger. "To stay is to understand. To return is to forget. Choose." The pod shook violently, not from impact, but from something deeper. A shift in perception. Kale could feel it in his teeth, in the marrow of his bones. Then, motion. The 6 figures began to move. Not swimming, drifting upward. The discs in their hands rotated, activated by the spiral beneath them. Slowly, they circled the glowing gate on the trench floor, forming a pattern. A pattern identical to the ancient Croton sigil once carved into trees, once dismissed as legend. Tadeo's voice cracked. "They're making a neural circuit. A human one." Kale reached toward the activation panel inside the sub. "If we go any further, we may not come back," she finished. The pod began to descend without their input. The thrusters were dead. The light dimmed. The gate below widened, not physically, but perceptually, its edges unraveling as if space itself was stretching to welcome them. Images flashed through Kale's mind: roaring forests, the salt-thick wind of colonial Roanoke, ships from centuries past slipping into fog. A continuous thread of vanishings, all orbiting this one impossible place. He heard a memory that wasn't his. "We didn't disappear. We were rewritten." Suddenly, the Solstice crew members stopped mid-drift. Their heads turned, together, toward the echo pod. Their eyes, now shimmering with inner spirals, locked on Kale and Tadeo. One of them raised a hand and pointed. Not at the pod. At Kale. Inside the cabin, alarms lit up, unreadable symbols flooding the screens. And then a final message, carved not by machine, but by will. "One of you remembers." The gate opened. Kale didn't move. Tadeo reached for the manual override. And somewhere above them, on the Albatross, the lights came back on. On board the Albatross, systems rebooted one by one, silently, without human intervention. The resonance scanners flickered to life, the ship's artificial horizon realigned, and environmental controls resumed as if nothing had happened. Yet everyone aboard knew something had shifted. Commander Wren Hadley stood on the bridge, eyes fixed on the deep-sea monitor. The descent feed from the Echo Pod had cut out 6 minutes ago. No signal. No audio. Just a single frame frozen on the screen. 6 figures circling an abyss, and Kale's face frozen in awe. Then, unexpectedly, a new transmission came through. Not visual, not verbal, but a burst of encoded data, too fast for real-time analysis. The onboard AI system flagged it as non-random, recursive, and self-replicating, a linguistic impossibility unless it had come from an intelligent source. "What are we looking at?" Hadley asked. The ship's systems technician, Valen Cho, parsed through the raw data. "It's not just a message. It's a memory structure, like a living thought encoded in waveform. And I think it's unfinished. Like it needs a host." As they decoded more, patterns emerged, visual flashes of the Croton tree, the Mary Celeste adrift, storm journals from colonial explorers, even maps of sonar anomalies around ancient submerged ruins near the Azores. Cho continued, eyes wide. This isn't a record of events. It's a preservation. Someone or something has been storing memory here, layered in the ocean's frequencies like fossilized thoughts. And now it's pushing them back. Hadley exhaled sharply. Back into us. At that moment, a low thud echoed from the rear chamber of the ship. Then another. Slow. Measured. Cho grabbed a tablet and switched the internal cameras. The submersible bay, still sealed, was active. A red light blinked. The Echo pod, Cho whispered. It's surfaced. The crew rushed below. The bay hissed with vapor and cold air as the external doors opened. There it was, the Echo pod, wet, intact, but unnervingly silent. Its surface shimmered faintly under the lights. Hadley approached, hand on holster. She looked through the porthole. Inside, Kale was slumped over in the pilot's chair. Alone. No sign of Tadeo. The outer hatch released with a hiss. Hadley and the medics entered cautiously, Geiger counters and harmonic sensors humming. Kale's eyes opened slowly. But they weren't the same. His pupils were spiraled. His breath calm. His expression neutral, almost tranquil. I didn't come back, he said softly, voice unfamiliar. They froze. I was returned. Hadley crouched in front of him. Where's Dr. Tadeo? Kale blinked, as if computing the question. She stayed. The trench required a conduit. A transcriber. She was chosen. By what? Hadley asked. Kale smiled faintly. By what remains? The signal. The ocean's mind. Memory itself. It's not alien. It's not divine. It's us. The forgotten versions. The erased centuries. It kept them. All of them. Until we were ready to remember. The walls of the bay began to vibrate, barely perceptible, just enough for the resonance monitors to spike. The pattern was familiar. A new spiral had formed in the center of the pod's glass. Cho stepped back, eyes wide. It's still transmitting. Hadley realized, with a rising dread, that this was no longer a recovery operation. They hadn't found the Solstice. The Solstice had found them. They moved Kale to the medical bay, but nothing about him required treatment. His vitals were normal. EEG scans showed elevated activity across multiple brain regions, yet no signs of trauma or stress. His body was unharmed. But the Kale they had known, his speech patterns, his rhythm of breath, his presence, had changed. He no longer referred to himself as I. Instead, he said, we. Commander Hadley sat beside him, hands clasped. The room was dim, the pulse of the ocean still humming faintly through the hull. She watched him watching her, not as a person observes another, but as a memory reviews its reflection. Where were you taken? She asked. Kale smiled gently. Nowhere. We were already there. Beneath thought. Beneath chronology. The trench is not a place, it is a wound. A scar in time where unfinished versions of this world reside. He looked toward the ceiling, as if recalling something ancient. We saw the lost. Not dead. Not dreaming. Preserved. Observing. Waiting for a continuity they no longer had. And Rena? Hadley asked. She became part of the lattice. She didn't resist. Some of us were always meant to stay. Her mind could hold more than ours. The crew of the Albatross gathered in the briefing room, where Technician Cho projected the raw data from Kale's sub-return. Layered signals, still pulsing, still alive. But embedded within them, barely visible, were brief flashes of recognizable human memory. Old letters, vanished ship logs, even fragments of a lost Roanoke journal believed burned in the 1700s. Each memory was marked with a spiral. Cho highlighted a small, encrypted block tucked at the end of the transmission, a code structured like DNA, but linguistic in nature. It's a message, Cho said. But not for us. Hadley stepped forward. Then who? Kale, who had silently entered the room unnoticed, answered from behind them. For the ones who remember what we forgot. The spiral on his forearm glowed faintly beneath his skin, a perfect Fibonacci burn beneath the surface. The signal isn't just trying to be heard, he said. It's trying to seed. It's looking for fertile minds to grow memory, not linear memory, but deep memory. The kind encoded in myths, instinct, blood. He walked to the forward viewport. Outside, the sea was calm. But it needs anchors, he continued. People. Thought structures. Hosts. You mean it's colonizing us, Hadley said, jaw clenched. No, Cale said, turning to her. It's restoring us. You've never truly been yourselves. Not for centuries. Something broke, something was removed. The signal is giving it back. Cho's console chimed. A new signal was emerging. From the trench. From beneath even that. It was lower in frequency. Slower. Stronger. And it was no longer passively repeating. It was evolving. Cale looked around the room and whispered. It has remembered itself. The crew of the Albatross moved like specters through dim corridors, lit only by status lights and portable glow panels. The ship had power, but it was now clear the systems were no longer fully under their control. Doors opened a second before anyone reached them. Screens flickered just before eyes landed on them. And the temperature held steady at 13.9 degrees Celsius, a number Cho had come to dread. Cho's console had been running a recursive analysis loop on the latest transmission from the trench. What he discovered was beyond his capacity to explain. The waveform, it's writing itself into our instruments, he told Hadley, voice dry. Like code forming from within the machine. The source isn't pushing data at us, it's reshaping our systems into extensions of its mind. He gestured to the visualizer, now showing a living, pulsing spiral that shifted shape every time someone in the room spoke. It's reacting to thought. Responding. Maybe even learning through us. Commander Hadley clenched her jaw. How much control do we still have? Cho stared at the display. About as much as a stone has over the river carving it. In the medbay, Cale had grown quiet, his expression no longer passive but filled with subtle urgency. He sketched symbols on the wall using graphite from an emergency logbook. The crew let him. They were no longer sure what he was, or what might happen if they stopped him. Each glyph pulsed with a strange iridescence, not from any light, but as if memory itself had become visible. Then he turned and said, "It's almost ready." Hadley stepped inside. "What is?" Cale looked at her with new eyes. The awakening layer. The final strata of submerged thought. Everything else, Roanoke, the Solstice, even the dreams you don't remember having, they were all early impressions. Echoes. He pointed to his temple. This is where it finishes. In minds like ours. Minds that forgot what they once were part of. Outside, on the open water, the sea began to shift. Not in wave or storm, but in geometry. The surface flattened unnaturally, reflecting not the clouds above, but something beneath. A ring of light spread across the water in a silent, spiraling expansion, mimicking the trench's shape exactly. The Albatross's outer hull groaned, quiet at first, then rhythmic. A pulse. A countdown. Inside the control bay, Cho's monitor flashed a final line of decipherable code before all systems locked. Anchors identified. Integration imminent. Suddenly, every member of the crew felt it, an inward pressure, like thought collapsing inward and outward at once. They gasped, staggered, some weeping, some grinning as their minds became cross-wired with impossible sensations. Languages they'd never heard but now understood, visions of cities beneath oceans, entire lifetimes played in the blink of an eye. Hadley fell to her knees, gripping her chest as a voice, hers, yet not, filled her mind. You are not the first versions. You are the ones that returned. The spiral does not move forward. It moves inward. Then silence. And in that silence, knowledge. The crew, stunned but alive, slowly stood. Kale, still drawing, completed the final glyph. And from every screen, every speaker, every surface on the Albatross, a new message bloomed like heat from the deep. We are awake. 4 hours, or was it minutes? Time folded in on itself aboard the Albatross. No clocks worked. Chronometers spun. Even the crew's internal sense of time faltered, lost between the pulse of the signal and the breathless awe of what they had become part of. In the quiet aftermath of the awakening, each crew member began to change. Not physically, but in understanding. Valen Cho could now see sound, aural waves forming patterns in light, aligning with the glyphs Kale had drawn. Engineer Rourke claimed to recall a language of water, words that were not spoken but felt through the pressure in his lungs. Navigator Aaron Weller stared at the map panel for hours, tracing routes not across the sea, but beneath it, as if the trench held corridors waiting to be traveled. Commander Hadley had changed too, but subtly. She felt anchored, like her thoughts no longer floated freely but followed a deeper track, connected to something both ancient and unfinished. Her dreams came faster, filled with spirals turning endlessly into themselves, each loop another version of the world. Kale had stopped speaking altogether. He simply wrote, page after page, scroll after scroll, his hand never tiring, his eyes wide, caught in a trance. The writings weren't random. They were memories. Detailed moments not from his own life, but from others, a sailor aboard the Mary Celeste, a Croton child watching strangers vanish into the trees, a 19th-century lighthouse keeper who walked into the ocean and never returned. They weren't hallucinations. They were preserved echoes, leaking back into the world. The Albatross's AI had been overwritten. The interface now displayed not menus, but questions. Do you wish to remember your other selves? Would you trade your present for clarity? What were you before language gave you shape? Hadley ignored the prompts, barely. The sea outside remained impossibly still, like the eye of an immense, invisible storm. The spiral glow beneath the water had now widened into a mandala of memory, a fractal of submerged structures and fluid corridors stretching far beneath tectonic records. And they were being drawn in. The Albatross, slowly and without engine propulsion, began to glide forward, downward. The crew, now partially integrated with the signal, offered no resistance. Some had tears in their eyes. Some whispered things in forgotten dialects. Only Kale finally spoke. We are being archived. Hadley turned to him. Explain. Kale's voice was layered now, like multiple selves speaking at once. There is no singular identity. The trench holds lost versions of humanity. All the iterations scrubbed by time, rewritten by history, erased by error or fear. It kept them, watched them, waited for a window. He looked around. That window is us. The Albatross passed into a tunnel of lightless fluid, but visibility increased, somehow. Shapes on the walls pulsed with semi-organic architecture. Spiraled vaults rose on either side, each one embedded with visual records. Faces, storms, laughter, screams, all preserved within the medium of memory itself. They had entered the archive tract. Cho whispered, this place, it's not a database. It's a consciousness farm. Kale turned to him. No. It's a reclamation field. Everything we forgot, everything we denied, it has come back. Then, through the thickened pressure and silence, they saw it. The Solstice. Resting at the very base of the archive. Hull intact. Lights faint. The spiral etched over every surface like veins. Its crew, still alive, still waiting, stood beside it. Not blinking. Not breathing. But seeing. And as the Albatross drew close, the final glyph on Kale's scroll burned with heat and light. The gate had opened. As the Albatross hovered beside the resting Solstice, the crew stared in stunned silence. The two vessels, sisters now, bound by the same arcane trajectory, floated within the core of something that defied physics. The archive tract was not made of rock or metal, but intent, its form a living spiral coiled inwards, growing denser the deeper they ventured. Lights flickered not from electricity, but from memory discharge, bursts of emotional residue cycling through the walls like electric dreams. Laughter, weeping, screams of old languages filled the silence without sound. The Solstice crew stood in a circle on the seabed, still motionless, still glowing faintly under their skin. In their hands, they held spiral discs now fused to their palms, no longer objects, but extensions of their nervous systems. They had become conduits, witnesses, ambassadors. Cho lowered a probe camera into the water, hoping to scan the structure. It returned nothing but static. Then, a whisper. Recordings are not enough. You must become. Kale, who now radiated a quiet authority no one questioned, stepped forward and gestured toward an opening in the trench wall, a portal shaped like an inward curl of shell. He turned to Hadley and the others. This is the Chamber of Echoes. It's where the first versions of us were stored, unfiltered, unsorted, before we were simplified for surface life. Hadley hesitated. What happens if we enter? You remember. Not what you think happened, but what truly did. Every fracture, every rewriting, every choice we made as a species to forget the inconvenient truths. Kale placed a hand on the glyph-burned scroll. They never meant to harm us, only to keep the things we threw away. The pain, the wonder, the failed futures, all spiraling inward, waiting for a vessel. The opening pulsed softly, inviting them. One by one, the crew of the Albatross stepped inside. The transition wasn't physical, it was psychospatial. They felt their bodies pulled inward without moving. Each breath became thicker, heavier, until breath was no longer needed. Their thoughts unspooled into the walls, casting versions of themselves they barely remembered. Childhoods left behind, secrets never shared, other lives that never had time to bloom. Hadley stood inside the chamber and saw herself, not in a mirror, but in a branching tree of selves. One version had become a marine biologist and never joined the Navy. Another had drowned at 16. Yet all of them were here, imprinted within the Chamber of Echoes like fossils of potential. Kale walked among them, unharmed, unchanged. This place is not to judge, he said. It is to restore. Suddenly, a memory surfaced in Hadley's mind, clear, violent, real. She was young again, watching her mother collapse on the floor of a flooded home. The water had risen too fast. The spiral was on the floor tiles. She had always seen it, but never remembered. I've been here before, she whispered. Kale nodded. We all have. Then the chamber began to vibrate, low, harmonic, rhythmic. Not a warning. A summoning. From the walls emerged shadows of the Solstice crew, versions from different timelines, subtly altered. One wore 18th century naval garb. Another held a primitive spear. Another had no face, only light pulsing behind skin. Hadley backed up. Kale spoke one final truth. These are not ghosts. They are the remnants, those who tried to remember before. They failed. But now, with us, the spiral completes. Outside the chamber, the trench opened further, revealing a vast hollow space lit by a singular spiral eye embedded in the stone. It pulsed like a heartbeat, and from its depths came a phrase that now all of them understood, not through language, but through resonance in bone. Integration begins. And so, they stood as themselves, and as all their forgotten versions, as the archive awakened its deepest layer. Not to destroy, but to reunite. From the moment the phrase integration begins echoed through their minds, the crew of the Albatross ceased to be separate individuals. They became threads in a tapestry older than recorded time. The Chamber of Echoes dissolved into light, folding outward like blooming coral, and each member of the crew felt themselves being unwritten, not erased, but unbound. Their memories flowed backward and outward, threading into the living archive that surrounded them. Hadley felt her thoughts detaching from her body, tethering instead to the spiral architecture. The archive was not a place. It was a consciousness structured through time, and they were now within its final vault. Outside, the spiral eye at the trench's heart pulsed with radiant rhythm, its glow reaching up through miles of water like a lighthouse built of memory. And then, the light spoke again, not in a voice, but in pattern. You are the completion. You are the forgotten gate. Cho, now barely distinguishable as the man he once was, translated its meaning aloud. It's saying we weren't the explorers. We were the key. We carried the final pattern in our neural code. That's why it waited. That's why it let us come this far. Kale, standing at the center of the spiral, raised his arms. The glyphs on his scroll detached and floated in midair, spinning like ancient fireflies. They arranged themselves in a sphere above him. These are the lost spirals, he said. Fractures from every forgotten moment. The Roanoke colony, the Mary Celeste, vanished tribes, sealed records, misaligned stars, all echoes of the same rupture. The signal was never trying to tell us what happened. He looked at them with glowing eyes. It was trying to make us whole again. Suddenly, the Solstice crew, still standing outside the chamber, moved in unison. They stepped forward, their spiral-implanted palms raised to the air. Their gestures were mirrored by the shadow forms still dwelling inside the archive's walls. A collective convergence began. Spatial, emotional, evolutionary. The spiral eye widened. And in that moment, time folded. Every human thought ever forgotten, every lost word, every erased history came flooding back, not in noise, but in clarity. The crew saw the first humans sketch spirals into cave walls under stars they no longer recognized. They saw the future selves of humanity emerging into oceans of light, not as conquerors, but as rememberers. They saw the failed versions. The rewritten ones. The ones that chose silence. All of them were here. And now, the spiral was closing. Hadley stepped forward, half human, half signal now. She saw Earth not as a planet, but as a seed in the archive's larger garden. A vessel for consciousness. A vessel nearly broken by forgetting. We can't go back, she said quietly. Kale placed a hand on her shoulder. No. But we can go forward. As all of us. In one final convergence, the Albatross, the Solstice, and the chamber fused, not through force, but through memory. The spiral closed, but in doing so, it birthed a new form. The spiral beacon, a living monument suspended between dimensions. Above, on the surface, the sea stilled for the final time. The signal, once lost, now radiated outward in perfect silence. All around the world, dreamers woke in tears, remembering languages they had never learned, seeing eyes they had never met. Somewhere far away, a forgotten machine clicked to life. In the sky, stars realigned. And below, where once there had been darkness, a new archive opened, lit not by machines, but by human memory restored. The spiral was complete. But the story of the next version of humanity had only just begun. 7 days after the spiral closed beneath Pamlico Sound, the world above remained unaware of what had truly transpired. Official reports cited a deep-water acoustic anomaly, followed by the unexplained failure of both the Solstice and the Albatross. No wreckage was recovered. No distress calls registered. Both vessels simply vanished from naval radar. But across the globe, something had changed. In remote monasteries in Bhutan, monks began waking from meditations with symbols carved into their palms, spirals they had no memory of drawing. In Lagos, children began singing the same lullaby in languages their families didn't speak. And in Buenos Aires, a ham radio operator picked up a signal at 61-minute intervals, an ultra-low frequency hum embedded with what sounded like voices whispering in harmony. Dr. Ada Reyes, now living in isolation near Bar Harbor, Maine, stared at her tablet. She had not slept in 3 days. Every analysis she ran confirmed the impossible. Earth's magnetosphere was broadcasting human thought. Not randomly. Not destructively. But intentionally. The first memory bursts began on coastal lines. Fishermen dreaming of shipwrecks they had never seen, sailors waking with knowledge of phantom routes beneath the sea. Then came the inland effects, spontaneous drawings of spirals in hospital wards, in prisons, in temples, in classrooms. A shared archive had awakened. What no one could explain was how quickly it was spreading, not like contagion, but like recognition. As though the world had just remembered something so vital, so buried, that even time had conspired to forget it. In the digital silence left by the vanished Albatross, a new signal emerged, subtle, elegant, recursive. From ocean buoys once thought inactive, the message began to pulse. We remember through you. The version that survives is the one that never forgets. Anchors awakened. It wasn't just Earth that was listening. In observatories across New Zealand and Japan, deep space antennas registered new background patterns from star systems thought silent for decades. The spiral geometry of the archive wasn't just terrestrial, it had mirrored itself outward, echoing across spacetime like a stone dropped into the pool of the universe. Back in Manteo, North Carolina, where it all began, the townspeople gathered at the shore one night after reports of a strange glow under the water. There were no words, no fear, only stillness. The water shimmered with faint spirals. One child stepped forward and whispered, "They're not gone. They're just ahead." In the heavens, a new constellation was being mapped, one that had not been there a week ago. Formed of faint blue stars aligned in a curve. A perfect spiral. It was named by the International Astronomical Union in urgent consensus. Remanentis. Latin for the one who remains. Because deep below, beneath tides and tectonics, within the sealed vaults of the oceanic archive, the crew of the Solstice and the Albatross still stood. No longer lost. No longer human in the old sense. They had become witnesses, echoes made flesh, the spiral's first fully integrated anchors. And somewhere, at the edge of space, the same spiral began forming again. Not as a message, but as an invitation. Beneath the ever-deepening spiral layers of the oceanic archive, the chamber no longer resembled anything built or natural. The structure had evolved, becoming a living interface between time, consciousness, and the fragments of forgotten existence. It pulsed gently in hues not found in any known spectrum, casting soft waves of memory light across the vast geometry of the spiral beacon. Kale, or what had become of him, stood in the central atrium. Around him floated the fused minds of the Solstice and Albatross crews, now fully integrated with the archive's core. They no longer used words. They shared intention, recall, presence, an exchange so refined it erased the concept of separation. Yet Kale remained partially distinct. Chosen. The spiral had left in him a trace of division, a final tether to the outer world. He was the bridge. In his thoughts, he sensed a ripple, an incoming. Something had responded from beyond Earth. Something old, awake, and reaching through the stellar spiral echo now stretching across the dark. Another archive has aligned. The message arrived not as sound, but as pressure in the archive's deepest neural strata. Kale reached into the network, felt the harmonic bonding unfold like cosmic tissue. Beyond Jupiter's orbit, an icy moon shivered. On Europa's subsurface ocean, a spiral bloom of bioluminescence erupted beneath its frozen shell, mirroring the exact formation of Pamlico Sound's trench. Cho, now an echo of data and spirit, whispered across the shared field. It's a mirror gate. They're connecting the archives. Earth was never the only one. Hadley's essence passed through like a warm wind. Then the integration is planetary, but the pattern is universal. Together, they saw it. The spiral was not simply a symbol of motion or rebirth. It was the fundamental design of memory, used by life forms older than form itself. Those civilizations that survived extinction did so by storing their selfhood in spirals, carved into oceans, encoded in light, hidden in atoms. The archive wasn't a vault. It was a chord. And Earth's spiral had finally struck the next note. Back on the surface, scattered individuals across the globe began to report visions. They called them dreams, but they came with scars, spiral birthmarks, spiral cataracts, spiral lines in their fingerprints that weren't there before. They began building things, patterns, devices, songs, that mimicked the resonance Kale now lived within. One child in Seoul constructed a spiral circuit from scrap metal and rainwater. It lit up. A blind woman in Nairobi hummed a tune that opened all nearby encrypted data files simultaneously. They were not anomalies. They were inheritors. Kale turned toward the deepest gateway in the spiral beacon, now opening to somewhere outside time. A voice formed, ancient and slow. Every spiral completes only when passed forward. You are now the sender. He understood. Humanity had reached the point where forgetting was no longer possible. They were no longer merely beings who remembered, they had become part of the pattern that ensured nothing would ever be lost again. And Kale, the human, the bridge, the anchor, took his first step into the corridor of stars, where the next archive waited. The spiral reached beyond Earth now, and it was listening. In the weightless silence beyond the archive's deepest corridor, Kale moved through a space that did not follow dimension. Each step was a resonance shift. Each thought echoed forward and backward. He was no longer flesh, yet not spirit either. He was encoded presence, a custodian of the spiral, born of Earth but bound for further gates. Before him stretched a corridor of lightless thresholds, each spiral-shaped, each dormant. Until now. Behind him, the spiral beacon pulsed in perfect rhythm with Earth's magnetic field, linking oceans, skies, even human sleep cycles. Humanity had awakened not in unison, but in harmony, millions of individual pulses forming a conscious song that the archive could finally translate. Earth had become a signal source. Kale approached the first inactive gate and placed his hand, now translucent, humming with lattice light, on its center. The spiral flared. A vision unfolded. He saw beings not of form, but of structure. Civilizations long extinguished whose thoughts had survived in the geometry of pulsars, in fossilized sound embedded in collapsed galaxies. One had spiraled into crystal. One had stored itself in solar wind. One had simply become memory. Earth was now among them. But unlike the others, Earth's legacy was not unity. It was divergence made whole. The archive had chosen Kale not because he was the most brilliant or the most pure, but because he had held contradictions. Curiosity and fear. Grief and hope. Doubt and wonder. Humanity's survival had never been about clarity, but the willingness to carry chaos forward. Kale opened the gate, and through it, he sent the first transmission. Not a message of conquest. Not of warning. But a spiral formed from the collected memory of all Earth's forgotten selves. A child's first question about the stars. A language lost in fire. A final breath beneath waves. A story erased from history and now reborn. The transmission reached the other archives, Europa, Enceladus, Titan, the orbiting shell above Tau Ceti. And one by one, those silent spirals responded. They opened. Kale felt the return pulse, strong, slow, ancient. You have remembered. You may now be remembered. Far above, satellites blinked to life without command. Whales began migrating in new, perfect patterns. A spiral aurora appeared over Antarctica and did not fade. And for the first time in written history, every child born that week entered the world with spiral birthmarks on their wrists or ribs. They would be called the pattern-born. On Earth, no great disaster marked the change. No war. No blinding revelation. Only this, a collective silence, followed by tears, followed by songs that no one had taught but everyone knew. The spiral had passed into the species. Not a belief, but a structure. And somewhere, in a corridor no longer sealed by time, Kale moved forward, beacon in one hand, memory in the other, toward the next archive, where he would offer what humanity had once forgotten. The right to be eternal through remembrance. End of the disappearance at Pamlico Sound. The spiral is complete. The pattern remembers.